Hey, Frank. So let's talk about what is the difference between full authority and limited authority in probate. So let's get started.
Hey, Gary. Okay, so that's a really good question, and it comes up all the time. Now, there's two types of probate, one that is simpler and the other is more complicated. They,
Good way to put
um,
it. A simpler one and a complicated. Can we just,
yes,
just focus on
and,
simpler?
and, it, well, that's the I was going to say the beauty of probate, but I'm not sure that that's the right word. But that is the it's the reality of probate is the better word. Is there's a simple way, there's a more complicated way, and then the simpler way could get more complicated very easily. And I'll explain what I mean by that as I as and I know the whole thing sounds complicated.
Yeah.
So okay, so full authority basically is when there's one person, one family member, or it doesn't have to be a family member, but one person that is going to be in charge of the decisions on
Right.
everything.
Mm-hmm.
You have the court and the judge who's making some decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the person in charge of making the decisions for the estate, or we
Mm-hmm.
can also say for the family.
Right.
So when you file your application with the court asks, are we doing this as limited authority or full authority? Most people like full authority because it's simple.
Mm-hmm.
And full authority basically says we have one person,
Mm-hmm.
let's say in this case, Gary,
Mm-hmm.
um, is going to be our representative.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and by the way, this only applies when there's more than one person involved with the probate, which typically there isn't. There's usually at least two heirs,
Okay.
there are at least two family members that are involved with the probate. It's very rare that you're going to have a both parents pass away and they have an only child and there are no other living relatives of any kind that could be involved with this as well. So there's usually at least a second person involved, and this is where it could potentially get complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because you have two people in charge, as long as one person says, "Hey, Gary, you be in charge. I don't want to do this. This is a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Are you okay with that?" And you say yes.
Okay, okay.
Okay,
So
so now
that's the
you're
difference then. The full authority is
o-
when it's one person who makes all the decision, and I will assume the limited one is when, let's say, I'm in charge, but then I still have to ask my siblings about what decision to make. I have to go back, get a consensus, and then go back to the court and say, this is what we decide to do. Is that how it works?
almost.
Okay.
You still have to get the other person's consensus on certain things. So
Mm-hmm.
even though Gary's in charge, as long as Gary tells the court, as long as the state tells the court Gary's in charge
Mm-hmm.
and nobody objects,
Mm-hmm.
nobody goes to the judge and says, "Wait a minute, no, I'm not okay with Gary being in charge." Then it automatically becomes limited authority.
And what
And we'll
happens?
talk about
Let's
that.
say that
And we'll talk about that in a second.
okay.
Let's stick with full authority. So full
Mm-hmm.
authority, Gary's in charge. There's one other person that's involved as well. But you asked, well, but I get to make all the decisions. Yes, you do.
Mm-hmm.
But you still, at least when it comes to the sale of property,
Mm-hmm.
you still have to send out a notice to the other person, to the heir.
Mm-hmm.
It has to come and the court has to get a copy of that notice. The court needs to see that Gary sent a notice to the other person that
Mm-hmm.
says, hey, second person, we're selling this property. We're
Mm-hmm.
selling it at this price.
Mm-hmm.
We're paying this commission to the broker.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what the estimate is going to be look like after all the costs are paid off.
Right.
That other person could look at the paperwork and say, wait a minute, I want a higher price, or I'm not happy with the commission, or. And as long as they're on the same page, then we're good. and Gary still has full authority.
Mm,
But if that person says, wait a minute, I know I'm not okay with this price, or I'm not okay with the commission being paid, or whatever.
mhm.
Um, and they actually they have that form that you send them, they
Yeah.
send it back, they could send it back to the court and say, no, I'm not okay with that. Guess what happens? Gary loses his full authority.
So what? Do I get replaced by another sibling?
You don't get replaced, but here's now, so now let's talk about limited authority,
Uh-huh.
because you just went from full authority to limited. And
Uh-huh.
this is why most people don't like limited.
Mm.
Number one, because you still make the decisions, but the court has to review absolutely everything you do and approve of what you do. So
Okay.
it, it
Uh-huh.
so it really it really slows the process down, because anything you're doing, and there's a lot of steps to the process. Anything you're doing has to be sent to the court. Judge has to look at it and say, yes, I'm okay with it, or no, I'm not. The most Here's where it really gets messy. Um, when you're selling a property and you have limited authority, you let's say you put the property on the market for sale for 750,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
750, yes.
750,000. Um, the uh, the court will actually do an appraisal, their own appraisal of the property.
Okay.
Now, let's say that house needs a lot of work. You've seen the inside, and the inside needs work. I mean, it doesn't look good. When the probate court does their appraisal, it's a drive-by. And this
Oh,
is
they don't
where it
see the
gets,
property inside.
oh, no.
Whoa.
So let's say they do a drive-by and the house looks nice from the outside, and they say, hey, this house is worth 900,000. And
Oh.
Gary knows it's worth 750, it because the inside it needs a lot of work.
Yeah. Now
Okay,
what?
so two things on the sale of the property. Number one, the court's going to say you need to sell the property at a sales price of at least 90% of the probate appraisal. So if we got a $900,000, yeah, you could already, I could see the wheels in your head saying, "No, that this isn't good."
Yeah.
So here's the thing: 90% of 900,000 is 810,000.
It's overpriced. It's overpriced at that
Harry
point.
listed the property at 750 because you know it's going to sell at 750. And let's say even in the super hot market, let's say you got 800 for it.
Mm-hmm.
Just multiple bids. I mean, in this market, it's possible that
Mm.
if you get multiple bids, that they bid the price up to 800, but you're at 800. Guess what? The
What?
court still won't approve the sale.
Now what?
Now
Now
you,
what? This is not my
now,
fault or the heir's fault. It's the court who's deciding the price, which is not a market value. Now what?
well, now what you actually have to go back and you have to explain to the judge, look, this is why it's sold for 800, not 810. And then he or she, either one, um, will say, okay, you have to go back to the probate uh, uh, appraiser and have him lower the price. And
Ah,
that's that at a month, 2 months. So that's where it's starting to get messy. But here's where it gets even more complicated, is when you sell the property to that buyer,
mm-hmm.
the even if, let's say that, well, let's use the example of, let's say they offered 810,000.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy, right?
Yes, we get the price.
Okay, we got the price. So we go to the courthouse, and Gary takes all the paperwork, shows that the house sold for 810,000, shows that the buyer's approved. We're ready to close. The the judge will still ask if there are any potential buyers that want to bid in the courthouse, like an auction.
Wow. So what happens to the buyer? We
Yep.
have a contract though. We have a
And
contract.
you have a contract, but in the contract it says it's a limited authority sale. And in that limited authority sale, it says,
Oh.
hey buyer, guess what? Even though we're under contract to sell you the property, we still have to go to court and the judge still has to approve this. And judge is going to ask if anybody else wants to make an offer on the property. They're at the
Wow.
courthouse and
Wow.
they can't, and somebody can't. And this is why I say it gets really messy because as a buyer, buyers are not happy that it, do an inspection on the property, right?
They did all the work
They pay
already.
for the they paid for the inspection.
Uh-huh.
They get an appraisal on the property.
Yeah.
They paid for the appraisal.
Yes.
They invested probably 30 days of their time to get a loan approval on this.
Yeah.
And somebody else could come in and say, the judge will say, I'm opening this for bids. Um, does anyone want to bid 812?
Sounds like a good deal for the one next, the one coming behind because they didn't do the homework. The buyer did all the homework.
Well, but this is where buyers just get really nervous and it makes sense because you spent all the money, you put in all the time, and somebody could still come in and buy the property and steal the property basically away from you. Not steal, but bid for the property. And what if they bid it up to 850?
Sounds like a good
And I've seen that
strategy.
and I've seen that happen, Gary, where a family member who has some sort of, emotional attachment to the house,
Mm-hmm.
um, they, or somebody, anybody could have some sort of emotional attachment to the house, and they could say, "Hey, I'll pay 850 for this."
Mm. Okay.
Now you've got a buyer who, again, put all that time, money into the process and lost the deal. And that's why probate with limited authority makes selling the property a challenge because you have to tell the potential buyer that it's still not a sure thing.
I see. I see. Frank, our time is up. Any last words for this? The difference between the full authority and limited authority.
Yeah, last words is it sounds very complicated
Mm-hmm.
and to a certain extent it kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
It is there's just so many moving parts on limited authority and you see how easily it could become excuse me, on full authority and how easily it could go to limited
Yeah.
authority, where you thought everything is, we're going down the simple road. That could change very easily. And if you're already starting from day one at limited authority, it's already very complicated as is. So it's a challenge. It is a challenge. The best advice I can give anybody who is hearing this and saying and scratching their head saying, wow, my head spinning. You know,
Mm.
I there's just so much to this that I don't see how it's not messy. Um,
Yeah.
and my suggestion is call me, email me your specific questions, and I'll try to answer them as best I can for you. Because at the end of the day, it is this is probably the most complicated aspect of probate.
Conga, how can people get a hold of you?
They could either call me at 626-289-1111, or they can always go to Frank Lopez Broker at Gmail, franklopezbroker.com.
Thank you. Thank you. Talk to you
Okay.
next time.
Okay, Gary, you're
Mm.
welcome. Bye-bye.